Thank goodness. All right. Well, I'm no stranger to technical difficulties. I've had them for years on the air with Channel 12 and other TV stations and radio stations, so I fully understand. Besides, what you're doing is something new and unique, and I applaud you for trying to pull that off and accommodating me. Anyway, so tonight I'm going to talk about climate. Now, I don't know if any of you folks have been following the fact that I write letters regularly to the Enterprise Record talking about climate. But I try to maintain a very factual basis about the approach to climate. The left, their whole basis for climate is all emotional. And seriously, there are people out there and people in Chico that believe, really, the world is going to end in a few years due to climate change. They have a sickness. They believe this rubbish that has been fed to them by the mainstream media. And, you know, I spent 35 years in television and radio, and I can tell you that today's crop of journalists is a real sad state of affairs. A lot of these folks have no scientific training whatsoever, no math training of any sorts, and they just write stories based on an emotional basis. And so we're faced with a rampant emotionalism versus fact. And the problem is that science and most of the scientists, they don't want to get in the middle of it. And so it gets taken over by all these activists. And so what I'm going to do tonight is show you some factual things about climate. And I have sent a number of books there. My latest book, Climate at a Glance, 30 topics that can be distributed. And you folks can have a look at that. It's also available free online at climateataglance.com if you want to download the PDF copy and use it. So what I'm going to do now is start my slideshow and talk about climate realism. Now, you folks all hear me up on KPAY radio on a regular basis, and I send that in by the magic of the internet every day. But I do now work for the Heartland Institute in Chicago. I am a senior fellow for environment and climate. And I also operate the most viewed website in the world on climate at whatsupwiththat.com, which has been around since 2006. And it was put together originally to be a science blog for the Enterprise Record. And that's since turned into something, well, worldwide. I have friends and contacts globally from that website. Now, I want to show you some of the headlines that we have seen this year. Unprecedented and terrifying. World sets all-time temperature record 2 days in a row. Oh, no. Climate scientists, July 4th was the hottest ever for average global temperature. July 4th was the hottest day in over 100,000 years, despite the fact there are no thermometers in existence 100,000 years ago. They know this. That's what the media is so damn certain of. And this is where they lie. This right here is one of the biggest lies they have ever published. There is no thermometer 100,000 years ago. It's a guess. And that's the biggest problem with climate science today. Most of it is a guess based on models. So how many of you folks believe these headlines? I mean, give me a show of hands. Does anybody believe those headlines? No, of course not. They're nuts. So let's talk about opening up a can of climate whoop ass on this stuff, right? Okay. So this is what happened on July 4th. There was this website called Climate Reanalyzer, and it's run by the University of Maine. It's a computer model, not actual real measured data. It's an estimate. And so one person on social media saw this little point over here, where that arrow is, and they go, oh my goodness, the temperature is unprecedented. Look at that. They never paid any attention to the fact that it was not real, actual measured temperature. They never noticed that it was a computer model. Instead, they start talking about unprecedented and record high temperatures that didn't even happen. And even the Associated Press had to run a correction a couple of days later saying, it noted that the reanalyzer uses model output data, which is called not suitable as substitutes for actual temperatures and climate records. This is from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, what you know as the Weather Service. They had to tamp this down, but the media went berserk with this stuff. And that's the biggest problem we have. The media is the biggest driver of climate alarmism out there. And so that's why I write letters on a regular basis over to the Enterprise Record to try to tamp this stuff down. You know, in the space of 2 days, we went from temperature data, this is from their headlines, totally unprecedented and terrifying, to temperature data that was not suitable for purpose. And yet they got the whole world alarmed over this climate model that didn't have anything really, valuable in it. So how many of you believe these headlines? You shouldn't believe any of them, honestly. I say this to you as a person who is responsible for providing forecasts on a daily basis. And, when I get a forecast wrong, people let me know. Climate scientists, however, don't seem to have that problem. If they get a forecast wrong or mess up something, the media never calls them on it. So what else about climate is exaggerated? Well, a lot. There's a huge amount of exaggeration out there. Now, this graph that you see here is pretty common. This is the kind of graph that you see about global temperature. This goes back to 1880 to the present. And this shows how it is presented by the media. You see the steep rise in temperature. But I want you to look at something, and this is really important, and this is where they get you. Over on the left side, where it says temperature in Fahrenheit along the vertical scale, look at that. It goes from 56 degrees to 59.5. This is a highly magnified scale. And so what's really going on here is they're showing you a magnified temperature increase. But if you change that and you put that into the scale of human experience, the temperatures that we experience on a day-to-day basis, or the temperature difference that we get from, flying from New York to Miami, or going from, Los Angeles to Seattle, it's minuscule. You would hardly ever notice that the climate is changing if you plotted the temperature like we normally see it on a regular thermometer. Again, it's an exaggeration. And this is another one of the biggest lies in media. They talk about these temperature anomalies, but it really is relatively flat. We've had a mild temperature rise since 1880, most of it driven by natural factors. So the same thing happened with stuff like ice melt. They talk about Greenland is going to melt, and it's going to cause the sea level to rise catastrophically. Cities will be flooded, places will be underwater, and all this sort of stuff. But again, they only show you this magnified graph. The one on the left shows the magnified ice loss. Again, when you shrink it down to the total, all of the ice in Greenland, and compare it to that, it's a flat line. Seriously, it is undetectable in terms of loss. But the media, not being smart, not being about science, not understanding the difference between anomalies and absolutes, puts out these highly magnified graphs and makes you think the world's coming to an end. Tornadoes. We see tornado stuff all the time. CNN shows pictures of tornadoes tearing up towns. We see all this kind of stuff going on. And interestingly enough, there's this belief out there that tornadoes are getting worse. There's more tornadoes than ever before. Well, it's false. The data, and you can see it right here, this is data from NOAA, shows no increase in violent tornadoes throughout the United States from 1970 to 2020. The data is absolute on this. Yet the impression is, because of the media, they're out there pushing and hyping this stuff constantly. And what's different between now versus 1970? Well, in 1970, we didn't have the Weather Channel. We didn't have CNN. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have millions of cell phone cameras out there where people can carry them around, take video, and send it over to CNN on a moment's notice. So the impression is that severe weather is getting worse, but it's really all about accessibility and reporting availability. We're able to report and see things far better than we used to be able to do 50 years ago. And so it gives the impression of an increase that isn't true. Heat waves. Gosh, there's this impression that we're suffering through these nasty heat waves. Well, the worst heat wave the United States ever experienced happened in 1936 during the summer. 5,000 people died during that heat wave. You can see that big spike right there. Since then, we've had nothing like it. And I can tell you for sure that if you ever watch the movie The Grapes of Wrath, you don't see the people coming in to California driving SUVs. It didn't happen. They're not belching out carbon dioxide or whatever. This event happened before carbon dioxide was listed as a culprit for driving climate change. Again, the impression that the media tries to put out there is that heat waves are getting worse. They are not. Farming. They say that, let's not eat beef anymore. Beef is bad for the planet. Let's eat the bugs instead. Yeah, they think that we'll be able to make protein supplements out of bugs instead of having, grade A sirloin. But here's the deal. Cattle represent just 2% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. And so there's really not a problem there. Climate change is not being driven by having a steak. It is just not happening. Yet the people out there that are screaming about climate change are the same people that say, eat vegan, don't eat meat, be a vegetarian. They want you to live their lifestyle because they believe their lifestyle is superior to yours. Well, it's bogus. So what's the biggest exaggeration of all? Well, it's this thing here. I told you about it, this graph. But here's something else. Here's what no one really pays attention to, and I've been working on this for over a decade. And it actually started in Chico. I don't know if any of you folks know of him or not, but there was a fellow by the name of James Goodridge. He was the former state climatologist for California. He retired in Chico and became a friend of mine. And he showed me some of the things that were going on with the way temperature was being measured around California. He'd visited some stations that he thought were just obscene. And so I started doing studies of weather stations around the United States. I did an updated study last year called Corrupted Climate Stations. And part of the reason we're seeing temperature increases is because the temperature measurements themselves are corrupted. Now, I'm pretty sure every one of you who's ever gone shopping, gone out to the new mall or the old mall or Kmart or whatever, knows as a matter of experience that the temperature in the middle of the parking lot for any one of these places is hotter than the temperature in Bidwell Park. Climate scientists have yet to figure this out. I'm not kidding you. They're that stupid. This sensor that you see there on the end of this arrow is a weather station. It's where the temperature sensor is located. And this is in Sandpoint, Idaho. Now, who in their right mind put the temperature sensor out there to measure climate change where the front of a radiator from a car is right next to it? I mean, you'd have to be some kind of a real idiot to do that. And yet, when I argue that these stations should be closed because they're not representative of climate change, I'm called a climate denier. I'm in the employ of big oil and all this other horse shit. Seriously, they will not look at this stuff because they are so entrenched in the belief that the climate is on its way to hell in a handbasket. And this is where it used to be. On the left, you can see it was out in a field. And then they moved it. Why? Because there was nowhere in there to run it anymore. And so they moved it over to the airport, where the airport people could write it down and send in the temperature every day. It's just that simple. And there are hundreds, thousands of these stations throughout the United States. It's called the Cooperative Observer Network. And this is where temperatures are measured daily, the high and the low, along with rainfall. And they send it into the National Climatic Data Center in Asheville, North Carolina. And from there, it's compiled. Well, I did this study looking at all these different Stevenson screens and these MMTS temperature sensors and so forth and so on, all over the country. I surveyed over 1,000 of them. And here's what we found. There is a law, a published rule by NOAA that says these stations have to be at least 100 feet away from any extensive concrete or paved surface. But what I found is that over 96% of them are not. They've been encroached upon. Well, this is Marysville. This is the fire station in Marysville, right across the street from the lake down there. And this is one of the first stations that I found. And that arrow that says MMTS shelter there is in a parking spot next to where the fire chief would park his vehicle. And there's these cell phone towers. And to the right of that, you see these electronics buildings where they've got air conditioners to keep the cell phone electronics running and so forth. Well, I stood there right next to the sensor, and I could feel warm air coming off of the air conditioner units blowing on the temperature sensor. Again, this is where they were measuring climate. And this sounds so absurd. How possibly can it be true? But I've documented hundreds and hundreds of cases like this. University of Arizona, at the Atmospheric Sciences Department, where they have scientists that should know better. They've got it in the middle of the freaking parking lot out front. I'm not kidding. Mind-blowing stuff. Why? Well, it's just like Chico State. Chico State started out as a small land grant college, it had a couple of buildings and it had some agricultural fields, lots of land. Through the last century, more and more buildings got built, more and more parking lots got built. And the weather station at the University of Arizona kept getting moved. Finally, they had nowhere to put it because they'd used up all the land. So they put it in the parking lot out in front of the Atmospheric Sciences Department. I'm proud to say I made a huge stink about this, and this station was closed, and it's no longer reporting its bad data. This is in Woodland, California. Same thing. Temperature sensor in a parking lot. You can see that pole there. Infrared picture I took of it shows how hot the asphalt and concrete and the roof is. Is this a place where we should measure climate change? Hell no! But that's what they do. I'm sorry I'm getting animated about it, but it is just mind-boggling to me that science is not paying attention to this. This is Arco, Idaho. We have the temperature sensor next to the newspaper there, and they use it as a bike rack. And the parking lot's right next to it. And you can see the difference between the regular and the infrared. A lot of heat there. This one is Colfax, California, at the fire station there. Same thing. They put this up on top of a rock wall. The infrared photo shows that the rock wall gets heated by the sun, and the heat rises, and so it's going right up into the sensor. The data showed a huge spike once they made this move, when they updated the station there. This is in Florida, Fort Pierce, Florida. Got a whole bank of air conditioners right next to the temperature sensor. Yeah, perfect place to measure climate, right? This one, Grants Pass, Oregon, same thing, in the middle of a parking lot. The chief engineer there is a friend of mine at this radio station. He tried to get the Weather Service in Medford, Oregon, to change this location, to move this sensor, and they refused to do it. Incompetence. So basically, it's really simple physics. You got sunlight beating down on concrete, like you see here on the left in figure A. And then at night, figure B, that concrete that got heated up releases the heat into the air. The temperature sensor records this. It records a higher temperature than it normally would. And it's all about the sun storing energy in concrete and asphalt and then re-radiating it at night. And that brings up the nighttime temperature. And because climate change is tracked by the average temperature, the average between the high and the low of the day, the average goes up because the nighttime temperature goes up. Now, I published a study with the American Geophysical Union in 2015 that showed the difference between these weather stations that are corrupted, having these problems, versus the weather stations that have not. We found over 100 left in the United States that had not been corrupted. And the difference is, the blue line in this graph shows climate changing, the temperature changing from 1979 to 2008. It's about half of the rate of change versus the corrupted station. So the bottom line is, a good portion of the temperature that is attributed to climate change is because of corrupted stations just like this. And so we are asked to change our lifestyle, our energy system, all of this stuff based on bad data and the fact that science is not paying attention to the bad data. They have a network out there that they actually put together since they started knowing some of this stuff in 1998, but they never show it to the public. The one on the left is from this state-of-the-art system that's away from everything, not out in the middle of a parking lot. And they don't publish that data to anybody. Well, I'm the station on the right there, that's my station. I have created a station that can do this, and I actually have one in operation in Butte County, and I've had it in operation since May. And boy, oh boy, when you see my letter to the editor on this one, you'll find some interesting things from that data. Are we really in a climate emergency then? No, there is no climate emergency. I will point out that the phrase climate emergency did not occur in the English lexicon until 2016. It's a marketing tool. There's no climate emergency. There are people like these 350.org folks say in their draft declaration that we have to keep the temperature rise between, this and this, below 2 degrees centigrade for the globe. Like somehow, through taxing gasoline or whatever, we're going to be able to keep the temperature down. The premise is absurd. We cannot control the temperature of the planet through taxes. or through changes in their lifestyle. It's just not going to happen. But even worse than that, they go out and adjust the data. This is from NASA Goddard Institute of Space Studies. They've actually been adjusting the data in the past downward to make it look like the trend is even higher. I know it sounds absurd that science would do this, but this is the proof. These two graphs, the 2019 versus the 1998 version, and see those circled dots there? You see the one in the middle? The temperature's going down. And so it makes the trend, the slope of climate change, even higher. It's fabrication, flat out. If this were data being presented in a court of law, it would get thrown out by forensic science. But for climate science, hey, it's great. It's fine. Let's use it. And that's the problem. Science is caught up in a noble cause corruption. Now, this is the term that came from the police departments of the world. You know, you got a guy out there who's dirty. You know he's been doing this. He's been selling drugs or he's been killing people or whatever, but we can't pin him, right? So what has happened in the past is that the police will plant drugs on him, or they'll plant a piece on him and say, aha, we found it. Well, it's the same kind of thing that's going on in climate science. They see that the end justifies the means. And so they look away from these kind of things that are happening. They're talking about increased drought. Well, gosh, we just finished the best water year we've had in decades in California. But just a few years ago, Governor Jerry Brown declared permanent drought for California. You don't hear him talking about that anymore. Is the temperature today an emergency? No. Look in the middle of the 30s, hotter then. We had a couple of heat waves since then, but nothing like that. We're not in an emergency. Forest fires. The forest data from the National Interagency Fire Center, and I plotted it here, shows that way back in the 20s and 30s, we had much bigger forest fires in the United States compared to today, about 1/5. Even with the terrible things like we had in Paradise, not anywhere near what it used to be in terms of the total number of fires out there. Droughts, they talk about the mega droughts that we're going to have in California. Tree ring studies show that there have been in California's past droughts as long as 200 years. And you can see them in red there. During the medieval warm period, during the Roman warm period, we've had droughts. And yet that little piece over there on the far right with the label in purple, that's what we're told to believe is caused by man-made climate change. It's just not realistic. Sea level. Gosh, New York's going to be underwater. The History Channel made Armageddon Week talking about it. This is what's called the Battery at New York City on the point down there. This was in 2010. And this is the data from the Battery showing sea level rise. Well, it's been steady since 1850. And I'm pretty sure they didn't have any, carbon dioxide belching SUVs in 1850 or 1900 even. Sea level rise has been steady. And part of it has to do with the fact that New York itself is sinking. It's doing a rebound from the glacial times. And so it's not real. Sea level is not going to inundate New York City, and it's not going to inundate other areas. Places like Miami, where they're talking about flooding, that had to do with subsidence. The earth is shrinking because they've been drawing too much water out of the water table. It's not reaching emergency levels. But even if we follow that graph that I showed you, I did some simple math here and looked at the rate of sea level rise, it would take 26,000 years to get to the stories that you see there on those buildings. It's a lie. And yet people like the History Channel were putting these kind of pictures out to the public. Severe rainfall events. Well, when we had Oroville Dam overflow and nearly break, that was due to an atmospheric river event. Now, we've had these forever on the West Coast. In 1862, California had a massive severe weather event, an atmospheric river that caused flooding in Sacramento. They actually had to move the state capital out of Sacramento because downtown Sacramento was flooded. If you go down to Old Sacramento and walk around, you'll see a high watermark down there where the Sacramento River was so high. I mean, it was up like 20 feet. People were getting around in boats. Again, this happened before SUVs or coal power plants or any of these other things have occurred. So what I want to leave you with is the fact that climate change is an exaggeration, mostly. Yes, it has gotten warmer over the last 100 years. And no, it is not a crisis. No, the weather is not getting worse. no, there's no reason to panic. And it's all in this book. And I've left 25 copies for you folks, and you're welcome to take them home. And also go to the website, climateatagglance.com, get a free download, and feel free to use that however you want, preferably in letters to the editor or other places, to educate some of these folks that are just off the rails thinking that we're going to die in the next 10 or 20 years. Thanks a lot.
Anthony, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you turn on the closed captioning, please?
Excuse me? Okay. You know, I have that one. We can try it again. I put it over on this one, Anthony, so that you would have it. And I captions.
Yeah.
Well,
Unfortunately, the audio that's coming back to me is really bad. It's very echoey and choppy. And many of you folks don't know, or maybe you do, but I have a strong hearing impairment. It's part of the reason I got into broadcasting, because I only had to talk. I didn't have to listen to anybody. But even with headphones, it's very difficult for me to understand what's being said. And so I rely on closed captioning a lot in order to be able to hear.
hold on a second. Okay, Anthony, now is it coming up in the?
You know, I probably, based on what our test yesterday was, I probably have to leave and come back in order to enable it. Remember?
No, can you see it now?
No, it's not there. It's probably there, but like I said, I probably have to leave and come back to get it to show up on my side of the screen.
Okay, the other thing that we can do is I can just type the questions in to the chat. How would that be?
Just let me just leave and come back. It'll be easy. Stand by.
Pretty interesting. Glad to have him. That was a great talk. He's great to follow on Facebook.
Sure.
Yes.
Are we open any kind of discussion on this?
We are. There is coming again. Okay, Anthony, so
There we go.
Anthony's.
I'm good.
Okay, does anybody have questions here?
And we just tell him, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Patsy says, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Anybody else?
A comment, I can remember when I was in school, I heard that we were headed to another ice age. Remember that?
Jacqueline Lincoln is commenting that when she was in school, they said that we were coming into another ice age.
That's true. During the 1970s, we had a strong downturn in temperature. And that was not just in the United States, but that was global. And there were actual scientific studies being pushed at that time saying that a new ice age is impending. But guess what happened? It didn't happen. Climate science was wrong then. But then they switched modes. And I will say that the reason that the primary reason they switched modes has to do with astronomer Carl Sagan, because he was part of the team that put the first Mariner probes on the planet Venus. And when they got to Venus and they discovered that carbon dioxide was the major component of the atmosphere and the surface temperature was 600 degrees, hot enough to melt lead, that put alarm bells in their heads. And so they started worrying that, you know, with increased use of coal and automobiles and so forth and so on, putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we were going to see a runaway greenhouse effect like happened on Venus. And there were papers written about this. Well, that never happened either, and it's not going to happen because Earth has a self-regulating mechanism. It's called the intertropical convergence zone. It's along the equator, and it's a series of clouds and thunderstorms that happen every day that radiate heat back into space. It's too complex to explain over this, but basically, if you hear someone saying the Earth's going to go into runaway greenhouse effect and it's going to be 200 degrees, you know, in 50 years or whatever, don't believe them. It's garbage.
Does anybody else have a question? Did you have something, Jim?
wanted to say that Epic Times had a article last week, meteorologists and scientists say there is no climate emergency, and it's a nice 4-page article in the last week's.
Go ahead and say that again. Into the
Yeah, I didn't catch all that.
Yeah, the Epic Times from last week had the headline, meteorologists, scientists say there is no climate emergency, and they went into 4 pages, which is long for them, with multiple interviews substantiating that viewpoint.
I don't understand that question. I'm sorry. Sherry, can you?
I'm typing it in. I'm typing it in.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate you accommodating my hearing issue. So yeah, almost everything that you see today in the media is an exaggeration or an outright fabrication. And I'm sorry to have to say this, but it's true. I mean, I've been a member of the media for decades, and I've never seen anything like it. You know, it used to be, the old saying was, those who can do, those who can't teach. Well, now I think it's those who can teach and those who can't become journalists. Seriously, it's that bad. All right, waiting for that message to come through.
Oh, sorry. There it is.
Nope. Not seeing it.
Are you seeing this now?
No,
Okay.
I see a chat.
The Epic Times had an article last week stating that meteorologists and scientists say there is no climate emergency.
That's right. There is no climate emergency. There's over 1,600 scientists, engineers, geologists, and other people of scientific disciplines that have signed a declaration saying they've looked at the data, they've looked at what's going on, and they don't believe that a climate emergency exists. And again, I'll point out, these are marketing tools. Climate emergency did not exist in the lexicon until 2016.
And Anthony, that's your new television studio at your house that you're in right now?
Yes, it's in the basement of my home. And actually behind me up here, you'll see I've got some studio lights. I actually have a green screen that pulls down where I can do the chroma key like I used to do on television. And at some point in the not too distant future, I'll be launching a television channel for Chico and Northern California. Actually, you can see it right now if you go to the kpay.com website. We have a streaming television channel there, but it'll be improved with inserts and so forth. But we'll be talking about all kinds of different weather, real live weather on a 24/7 basis. And you can get this up on your smart TV. You'll be able to watch it on your phone or your tablet or your computer. And it's totally free. Yeah, there'll be some advertising on it, but it won't be obnoxious. And we'll also occasionally put some stuff up there about climate. And so that's coming within the next month or so.
Jonathan Woolsey is on here. He said, love the infrared photos. That takes it out of the rhetorical and makes it undeniable. That is a powerful tool.
Yeah, it is. And I want to tell you all a story. How many people in the audience, show me hands, how many have flown through Chicago O'Hare Airport? Yeah, a few people. Okay, so when you get your luggage tag, it says ORD on it. And everyone thinks that stands for O'Hare Airport. Well, it does today, but it didn't at the beginning. It stood for Orchard Field, ORD, Orchard Field, which back at the dawn of aviation, that's what it was. You may have seen videos of Charles Lindbergh taking off in 1927 in New Jersey. He took off from a grass field. Aviation back then was mostly grass fields. And so what's happened at Chicago? Well, we went from a grass field, orchard field, had orchards on either side of it, to this megaplex of concrete and asphalt and jet exhaust and airplanes. And they measure the temperature there. And what do you think the temperature's done? Whoop, it's gone straight up. Oh my God, it's climate change. No, it's the fact that this giant megaplex of infrastructure has built up around where they take the temperature and have kept taking the temperature for the last 100 years. It's not climate change. It's just simply the change in the environment. You know, if you do a scientific experiment, you have to isolate the experiment from all of its external influences for it to be valid. Except if you're doing climate change, then anything goes, and even the data in Chicago. I know it sounds absurd what I'm saying. I'm not kidding about any of this. This is all real stuff.
Yes, we understand. They're doing a lot of the same things with little children, turning them from boys to girls right now.
Yeah.
You know, we're all supposed to pretend like the emperor has no clothes.
There are children that are scared that they don't have a future. And because they are scared they don't have a future, they are not trying anymore. They're not worrying about education. They're not worrying about getting a job, getting married, having children. They're not doing the normal things. From my perspective, this is child abuse.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of child abuse going on these days. Well, does anybody else have something they'd like to ask? Well, thank you very, very much, Anthony.
My pleasure to be here.